if I told you all of these sounds were made using just Serum and no external processing, no use of crazy samples, just lots of shit going on here? So this is kind of a kind of sound that I like to make every now and then, where I just put a shit ton of modulation on a shit ton of parameters inside Serum, and then you can get these really cool results, which you can use really well for like putting in the background of stuff, or like chopping it up and getting the cool bits out of it to put in your music. And it's kind of cool because then, you know, with this, for example, if you're into like making some glitchy kind of beats, you can just like render this out and chop out all the glitchy sounds, and people are gonna like sit there breaking their heads over, you know, how do you make all these really intricate glitchy sounds? And the reality is you kind of didn't, in a way, because you just made this patch which made all these sounds for you, and you just pick the ones you like. So in this video, I'm gonna like show you how I kind of approach making these sounds, and I'm just gonna talk you through my thinking process in making one of these. So let's just start from scratch. I just start with like a MIDI clip that's like a minute long, like one note in it. I set up to loop that so I can just leave it playing forever. And yeah, let's just start from scratch. So that's kind of lame. So we use I'll typically start with like a wavetable. Let's find something. I made this once. Could be cool. Kind of a crazy one, but we'll see how it goes. So really quiet. Oh, of course it's quiet. I muted it. Anyway, I usually start with like kind of a crazy LFO shape on the volume. Let's do like this, and then that's way too fast, so I just set it to free running to just turn off the BPM thing and go like this. Actually, let's use another wavetable. I feel like making something a bit more scratchier, so yeah, this is cool. But the problem with this is that it's kind of this shape is like repeating itself constantly, which is fine on the one hand because there's like some cool angles in this. Actually, let's play around with those angles a bit, make it a bit more pointy, I guess. Something like this. Yeah. And that's fine, but it keeps repeating itself. So what I kind of do to combat that is I start messing with the rate of this, and I mess with it not by moving it by hand, but I assign another LFO to the rate of the LFO. And on this LFO, I'm going to use a crazy shape as well. And I use this preset shape quite a lot because it's kind of like the wildest, most random shape there is in the Serum preset shapes. But you can also definitely make your own for this if you want to. And sometimes I can get you some really cool results that you can't really get it with these shapes. So yeah, I modulated the speed of LFO1 with LFO2, but you can hear that it's kind of going crazy, and that's because the speed of LFO1 is being modulated by a shit ton, which is way too much. So we just take the LFO2 to LFO1 rate, and we just dial that back. And it's really, my process here is to kind of just mess with the amount of modulation and like the actual starting position of this knob to kind of get a result that I like. And it's totally okay to later down the line tweak this even more. So this is kind of cool, but now it's only like one dimension in which we're changing the sound, which is the volume. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get like another LFO, and then I'm going to assign that to the wavetable. I just use LFO2, I guess, because it's not directly related to the level. It is indirectly controlling the level, but not directly, so that's usually fine. It's like, it sounds random enough that you get a lot of varied results, and that's what I'm interested in. Yeah, just getting a lot of diversity within the same sound. Yeah, and then you could even go further than this and just take guess what? Yet another LFO with this shape. And we use that to control the rate of this. So if we do that, at this point we have LFO3 controlling the speed of LFO2, which is in turn controlling the speed of LFO1. So it can get kind of crazy, and sometimes it's a bit finicky setting these rates up in such a way that it sounds nice. But if you get there, it's really worth it, and I like kind of messing with it to kind of get the result that I am hearing in my head. Yeah, so another thing that I'm noticing is what I don't like about this is how loud this thing stays. So I want to change all these curves to be a bit more down like that, but rather than doing that here, I'm going to do that in the matrix by just dragging this thing here, the curve. You can hear the difference that makes. Is like, I feel like this is like makes those spike even spikier, the spikes here. So this is cool and all, but it's still not really what I want. So I'm also going to assign an LFO to the pitch. And that can be really cool. And that's really, assigning an LFO to the pitch is really what gets your sound kind of talking. It's like the first step to really get kind of a crazy sounding sound, I guess. So at this point, I want to get another oscillator involved. So I'm just gonna use, no, it looks a bit too much like high frequency stuff. Piano flute, what's in here? Looks like a really warbly wavetable, but pretty smooth, so not too many high frequencies, so that'll be cool for frequency modulating this, I guess. Now I want to sort of give you a note about like my philosophy on whether to choose an existing LFO or a new LFO, because the problem in Serum is that you only have 8 LFOs at max. So what I don't want to end up happening is the thing that happens when you make like a dubstep, like womp womp sound, where there's one LFO controlling like everything. Because at that point, you have sort of one shape, one source of movement that controls every parameter. So that's kind of lame. I want as many different sources of movement controlling all of the different parameters. So in general, I try to keep that separated by like volume. Right, so I have LFO1 controlling volume, and that means that I will never use LFO1 to control volume of something else. I might use this to control now like the pitch of this oscillator, which would be cool, I think, because I like doing like FM where both things are kind of like pitching around in different ways. But I will never use this for like the volume or the volume of a sound, or in this case the FM amount, because that's kind of the same as volume. Same as for like the wavetable position. So use this one for pitch. Let's just do a new LFO. So again with this shape, and I'll use LFO3, I guess, to modulate the speed of this. Yeah, and then we assign this to the FM amount. So now it's going way too fast, of course. Because again, by default, when you like assign one LFO to the speed of another, it modulates it like by like a shit ton. So you just gotta dial that back in the matrix. Now this is already kind of cool, but now I want to use another LFO to kind of change the wavetable here, just so we get even more variation out of this sound. Because that's really what I'm trying to push out of these sounds, is as many different things as possible. So kind of cool bit of the wavetable, I guess, or like this. Yeah, really unstable looking, but that's cool, I think. So at this point, I've basically modulated like the FM, the wavetable position, the level, the wavetable position here, and the pitch of both of these. So at this point, I would say it's time to start introducing sort of another thing that produces a sound. But we've already used both our main oscillators, and the sub oscillator is a lot less flexible. The noise oscillator could be a cool option, and I definitely use that a lot, but in this case I'm not going to do that, at least not yet. And instead I'm going to use like one of these crazy filters. So let's see, combs is always a good one. You can get some kind of crazy sounds with that. And then the thing is, the whole spiel about not having enough oscillators, the reason I'm going to the filter now is because if you crank up the resonance on like combs and flangers and that kind of stuff and phasers, they kind of start producing their own sound in a way. It's technically not the same as an oscillator, but for like practical purposes, it can be really similar. So hey, how about we put something like on the mix of this and then crank up the resonance and then also change the cutoff of this, which is essentially the same as the pitch. Ooh, that's a bit of a strong bass there. Yeah, you can use all sorts of filters. I also like the flanges and the phasers. Those work nicely, but I'm going to stick with this because this sounds neat. At this point I could even go so far as to introduce like the noise oscillator, or do that trick where you like load a sine wave into the noise oscillator and use that to modulate something, but I think for now this is probably fine. I'm just going to keep it as this. And yeah, like I said, flangers and phasers and also chorus and delay even can all sort of act like an oscillator. Technically you would call them resonators, I guess, if you crank up the feedback and use them to produce a tonal sound. But really for the purposes of sound design, it's all just a thing that adds a new sound or a new texture that you can control with these modulators. So yeah, we can use all of these things really. And since we already kind of have a metallic sound going on with a combs filter, I think it would be cool to use the delay, because if you crank down the delay time all the way and then you crank up the feedback, you can get some really metallic sounds. So that's cool, I guess. But of course, we're going to modulate the shit out of this as well. So let's grab another LFO, and it's typically best to put something on either the feedback or the mix, because those kind of control like how much the delay is contributing to the sound. So if you have that at a set value, then it's kind of always going to be there, and that's not necessarily what I want, because it might be cooler if it kind of comes in and out at different points. It's really about sort of happy accidents, like the Bob Ross kind of feel, So put this on here. Oh, that's really nice. Use another one. Yeah. I'm just gonna keep it running for now. And you'll just, because I explained most of the principles, and I think at this point it would be just most useful if you just kind of see me using this, because at this point you should be able to kind of follow along with what I do in the matrix, or what I do with all these oscillators, or with all these LFOs and all these flangers and phasers and whatnot. So I'm just going to kind of shut up for a second and just kind of mess with the sound. So at this point, I'm thinking, like this chorus, I'm kind of using it to kind of make like a noise sound, like this. It's kind of noisy and crazy. But what I'm doing is I'm using an LFO to kind of turn that noise into clicks. So every now and then it just kind of pops in like just a tiny burst of noise. I'm thinking that's cool and all, but I'm thinking that I don't want there to be noise, like noisy clicks all the time. So I'm kind of going to use this shape, and I'm going to set it as the auxiliary source to the thing here. So basically, to explain this, you have LFO7 that's controlling like the chorus wet amount. So that's what's turning the chorus basically like on and off to kind of produce these clicks. But then also the value of LFO7, so like how high it is at any given point in time, is multiplied by the value of LFO8, so how high LFO8 is. And you can see that I've made sort of a pseudo square wave here. So basically what that's going to do is, when this is at 0, no matter what the value of LFO7 is, the chorus is always going to be sort of muted, right? It's going to be always fully dry. Whereas when this is at its peak level, then it allows LFO7 to have its effect. And then to bring this a bit more regularity, of course, I'm going to modulate LFO8 by, well, take a random one, LFO5, I guess. Because at this point I'm losing like track super hard of like which LFO is doing what. Like there's so much stuff going in here. It's not uncommon for me to kind of like run out of space here, or at least to get like really close to the bottom here. I don't know what happens if like there's actually a hard limit imposed. That's actually, I'm kind of curious about that now. I'll figure it out, and if I figure it out, I'll put it in the video description if there's like a hard limit to how many things you can have modulating in Serum at the same time, I guess. So yeah, that's the explanation for LFO8, and also that should be fine now. So let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, so LFO7 is not pronounced enough, so I'm going to back off this curve a bit. So that's pretty cool. One final thing that I sometimes do to get kind of an analog sound. This works particularly if you're doing like sort of kind of a saw wave stabbing sort of sound. What works well is to just put on like the high pass and the low pass filter, and then kind of have those moving around on the really high end and the really low end with a lot of resonance. And then pushing that into like a soft clipper or maybe even tube distortion. Because that really can get you those really crunchy tones sometimes. It kind of depends on the input sound, and it also depends on whether like the peak on the EQ here is like lining up with the actual fundamental of the sound. Because if you get that, then the fundamental gets pushed super hard into the distortion. So you have that sort of broken subwoofer effect where like the lowest frequencies are distorting the high end, and it sounds really cool. So that's one thing you can do, and assign some of these. Just do small ranges, small movements, and we can try that, see if we like it. If not, we'll just get rid of it. Yeah, okay, I think this is doing some cool things, so I'm going to leave that. And I think that's pretty much done at this point. I can maybe even introduce some noise if I wanted to. That could be pretty cool if I just kind of every now and then blast some noise into here. Okay, that got kind of crazy. Maybe I'll do a little bit, but yeah, you can see that there's endless fun to be had with making sounds like this, and I can just do it for hours at a time, honestly. And then the really cool thing is you can save these patches. That's what I like to do, and then you can also um, just like freeze and flatten these, and then chop out the bits you like and use them in your music, and then you can get some like really crazy cool sounding sounds in the background of your music without having to go through the trouble of synthesizing them each and every time you need like a little bleep or bloop. And so yeah, finally I want to say that I'm kind of like showing you one kind of sound that you can make with this, but it can really be sort of anything. So I can, like I showed you in the beginning, I showed you a bunch of different patches. So just to kind of show the diversity of what's possible with this technique, if I grab Serum and get into the folder that I made for this, I call this one Glitchy Sound Design Farm because that's essentially what it is. Like, this is really weird, really comb filtery, really screechy sometimes, but this is like really glitchy, so you can see that I used a bunch of sample and hold, and I used sample and hold and some comb filtering and some like a sine wave modulating like a bunch of shit, like a sine wave at like audio rate. So yeah, that's the point I want to drive home. Like the final point I want to drive home is that you can really take this technique to a lot of different places to get a lot of different sounds. It's not like it's going to give you like a cool lead sound or a cool pad sound, at least not without chopping out a bit and then processing that a fuck ton, but it can be a really cool sort of source of sounds that you can then later process and mangle into something that suits your music. Cheers.